The Man Who Gave Water. The morning sun cast long shadows across Mason Reed's property as he stood on his porch. Winchester Model 1873 balanced in his weathered hands. At 40 years old, the former Union soldier had seen enough death in the war to last several lifetimes. The Dragoon Mountains rose in the distance, silent sentinels over the scrubland he now called home. A movement caught his eye. One of his cattle, separated from the herd, was being stalked by a gray wolf. Without hesitation, Mason raised his rifle, drew a steady breath, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the morning stillness. 800 yards away, the wolf crumpled mid-stride. What Mason didn't know was that eyes were watching, dozens of them. From the ridgelines surrounding his isolated Arizona ranch, 300 Chiricahua Apache warriors observed the precision of his shot. They had been there for hours, silent as the stones they hid behind. This was Apache territory in 1876, and most white settlers who ventured this far from civilization didn't last long. But Mason Reed wasn't most men. After Chickamauga, after watching his entire regiment get slaughtered in a war between countrymen, men he'd once called brothers charging with bayonets fixed against other Americans, he'd come west seeking not fortune, but solitude. The nightmares still came, faces of the dead appearing in his dreams, their blood-soaked uniforms a reminder of futility. He had built this ranch with his own hands, raised cattle, dug a well that tapped into an underground spring that never ran dry, even in the cruelest summers. He kept to himself, traded fairly with passing settlers, and asked nothing from anyone. Most importantly, he respected the land, taking only what he needed, leaving the rest be. As Mason turned to head back inside, something caught his attention at the edge of his property. A figure collapsed against his fence line. Even from this distance, he could tell it wasn't a fellow settler. The buckskin clothing and distinctive beadwork marked her as Apache. And something else, she was tall, remarkably so for a woman of any race, standing nearly 6 feet. Mason approached cautiously, his rifle ready but pointed down. The woman's lips were cracked white with dehydration, her dark hair matted with blood from a wound at her temple. She was conscious but barely, her eyes revealing both pain and fierce pride. "You need water," Mason said, knowing she probably couldn't understand his words but recognizing the universal language of suffering. He returned to his well, drew up a bucket of cold, clear water, and carried it to her. When he offered the dipper, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, but thirst overrode caution. She drank deeply, 3 times draining the ladle before finally pushing it away. Then she stood, towering and silent, studying his face with the intensity of someone committing every feature to memory. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the hills, disappearing into the heat shimmer like a desert mirage. Mason watched her go, then returned to his chores. He mended a broken fence post, fed his horses, checked his cattle. But an uneasiness had settled over him. Something about the woman's appraisal felt like more than gratitude or curiosity. It felt like judgment. That night, Mason's horses grew restless, pawing at the ground and whickering into the darkness. He slept fitfully, his Colt Navy revolver on the table beside his bed. Years of military training had honed his instincts, and those instincts were screaming warnings he couldn't quite decipher. At first light, Mason stepped onto his porch and froze. His ranch was surrounded. On every ridge, every hilltop, sitting motionless on horseback, were Apache warriors. Their spears and rifles glinted in the early light. He counted quickly, at least 20 on the northern ridge alone, and more appearing as his eyes adjusted. 300 warriors, he estimated, enough to overrun his ranch in minutes if they chose to attack. But they didn't move. They watched, silent and patient as the mountains themselves. Mason's hand twitched toward his rifle, then stopped. What good would one weapon do against an army? Instead, he stepped into his yard, letting them see him clearly. If death was coming, he'd face it standing. For 6 long days, the siege continued. The warriors remained on the ridges, rotating positions but never leaving. Mason tried to maintain his routines, feeding his animals, repairing equipment, drawing water from the well, all under the unflinching gaze of hundreds of eyes. The horses grew skittish, sensing the tension that blanketed the valley. Sleep came in fragments. Every crack of a twig jerked him awake, hand reaching for his revolver. The solitude he'd sought had become a different kind of isolation, the awareness of being constantly observed, judged by criteria he didn't understand. On the 4th day, a single rider descended from the eastern ridge. Mason recognized her immediately, the tall woman he'd given water to. She rode a painted horse with the confidence of someone born to the saddle. When she reached his yard, she dismounted and approached. Up close, her height was even more impressive. And now that she was no longer on death's doorstep, he could see the intelligence and strength in her features. "You not run," she said in halting English. It wasn't a question but an observation. "Nowhere to run to," Mason replied simply. "Others would shoot. Try to kill many before dying." Mason looked past her to the warriors on the ridge. "I've seen enough men die. Don't need to see more." The memory of Chickamauga flashed behind his eyes. The chaos, the smoke, the screams of the wounded left to die in no man's land, calling out for water that would never come. "I've watched men beg for water as they died. Couldn't help them then. Could help you." She studied him. "I am Kaya, daughter of Hawkeyes, chief of Chiricahua." Mason nodded, understanding the significance. "Mason Reed." "Why you here, Mason Reed? This Apache land. I'm not looking to take anything that's not mine. Just want peace." "Peace?" She tested the word as if it were unfamiliar. "No peace between Apache and White Eyes? Too much blood now." "Doesn't have to be that way." Kaya's expression remained unreadable. "I was doing trial. 3 days alone. No food, no water. To become medicine woman. I fall, hit head. You give water. Why? You needed it. You not know who I was. Doesn't matter who you were. Thirsty is thirsty." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps. Or respect. "My father wants see what kind of man saves his daughter. See if you speak with forked tongue. See if you run for soldiers when we let you." "And what has he decided?" "Not decided yet. Test still happening." With that, she mounted her horse and rode back toward the ridge, leaving Mason with more questions than answers. On the morning of the 6th day, dust clouds appeared on the southern trail. Riders approaching fast, 15 men at least, their rifles glinting in the sun. Mason recognized the leader immediately from his military bearing and full beard. Captain Samuel Carter, former Union officer, now leading a militia determined to pacify the territory. The militia surrounded Mason's yard, horses blowing hard from the gallop. Young Thomas Wilson, barely 20 and eager to prove himself, kept his rifle trained on Mason. A jagged scar ran down his right cheek, a mark from an earlier Apache encounter, feeding the hatred that burned in his eyes. "Reed," Carter called out, "you've got Apache trouble." "No trouble here," Mason replied calmly. "Just visitors." Carter's eyes narrowed. "We've been tracking a war party that hit Patterson's settlement last week. Killed 3 families, including children." His gaze swept the ridgelines. "Tracks led straight here." "The Apache have been watching my ranch for 6 days, Mason said. "They haven't fired a shot or harmed my stock." Wilson spat in the dust. "They're just waiting for reinforcements before they murder you in your sleep. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead already." Carter dismounted, approaching Mason with the confidence of a man used to command. "You harboring hostiles, Reed? Because that makes you an enemy of every decent settler in the territory." Mason stood his ground. "I'm not harboring anyone. I'm just trying to stay alive." "By making deals with murderers?" Wilson's young face twisted with contempt. My brother was at Patterson's. They found his scalp hanging from a lance. I'm sorry about your brother, Mason said, but these aren't the ones who did it. How the hell would you know? Carter demanded. Before Mason could answer, Wilson dismounted and strode toward the house. Mind if we look around? Get some water for our horses? It wasn't really a question. Mason gestured toward the well. Help yourself. The militia spread out, some leading horses to the water trough, others examining the perimeter for tracks. Wilson remained focused on Mason, hatred rolling off him in waves. You got supplies inside? Carter asked, nodding toward the cabin. Enough to get by. We could use some. Been riding 3 days straight. Mason led Carter toward the cabin, acutely aware of movement on the western ridge. The Apache hadn't left. They just pulled back, watching, waiting. Inside, Carter scanned the sparse furnishings, the single bed, the wooden table with 2 chairs, the shelves of carefully preserved food. On one wall hung Mason's old Union jacket, the insignia of his regiment still visible despite years of wear. Chickamauga, Carter said, recognizing the unit. Rough business. Watch my entire company die, Mason replied. Men I'd trained with, eaten with, marched with for years. 1 minute they were there, the next, just red mist and screams. He paused. Not something a man forgets. Carter nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them. War makes men see things differently. He turned, fixing Mason with a hard stare. But this is another kind of war, Reed. These savages don't fight by any rules. They'll kill you no matter how fair you think you've been to them. Outside, a shout rang out. Found fresh tracks. Hundreds of them. All around the property. Carter's hand dropped to his revolver as he stepped back outside. The militiamen had gathered near the eastern fence, examining the ground where countless unshod hooves had left clear impressions in the soft earth. You lied to us, Wilson snarled, raising his rifle. They've been camped here, not just passing through. Mason kept his voice level. I said they've been watching. I didn't say they attacked me. Why the hell not? Carter demanded. You're a white settler on their hunting grounds. Maybe because I didn't give them reason. Wilson's face flushed with rage. You sympathize with them? After what they did to my brother? I sympathize with staying alive, Mason said. They had 300 warriors on those ridges. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead. The militia exchanged uneasy glances. The mathematics was clear. 15 rifles against 300 warriors wasn't bravery. It was suicide. Then why were they here? One man asked. Mason chose his words carefully. I helped someone, one of theirs. Gave her water when she needed it. Her? Wilson's eyes narrowed dangerously. I helped a person who was hurt and thirsty, Mason said, jaw tightening at Wilson's tone. Same as I'd help any of you. And they rewarded you by surrounding your ranch? Carter didn't sound convinced. They were testing me, making sure I wasn't going to run to the nearest fort and bring back the cavalry. Mason gestured at the militia. Looks like they were right to worry. The tension was broken by a sound that carried across the valley. A high, piercing call that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. Every man froze as the call was answered from multiple directions, echoing off canyon walls, surrounding them completely. They're still here, Wilson whispered, his rifle shaking slightly. Carter scanned the ridges. Nothing visible, just rock and shadow. But the calls continued, closing in like a noose. Mount up, he ordered. We're leaving. Now. We came to fight, one man protested. We came to fight raiders, not 300 warriors on their own ground, Carter snapped. The men scrambled for their horses. Wilson hesitated, his face contorted with the need for vengeance. Suddenly, he raised his rifle, aiming at a flicker of movement on the ridge. No! Mason lunged, grabbing the barrel just as Wilson fired. The shot went wide, echoing across the valley. A second passed. Then a hail of arrows rained down, sticking in the ground around them like deadly plants sprouting from the earth. A warning, not an attack. They could have killed every man in the yard if they'd wanted to. "You fool," Carter hissed at Wilson, dragging him toward his horse. "You'll get us all killed." Within minutes they were gone, thunder of hooves fading as they rode south. Mason stood alone in his yard, the calls having stopped as suddenly as they began. Then movement on the ridge. Kaya appeared first, followed by an older man whose bearing marked him unmistakably as a chief. Behind him rode a dozen warriors. They descended slowly, deliberately. When they reached the valley floor, Kaya dismounted and approached Mason. "You stop young man from shooting. Why?" "More killing won't solve anything," Mason replied. "You not tell them where we are," she continued. "You could. Make them happy. They not kill you." "I don't want anyone killed," Mason said simply. She studied him, then turned and spoke to her father in Apache. The old chief listened, then regarded Mason with penetrating eyes. He said something brief and sharp. "My father say test is over," Kaya translated. "You pass." Relief washed through Mason. "What happens now?" "Now we talk," she replied. The chief, hawk eyes, dismounted and walked toward Mason's cabin as if he owned it. It wasn't aggression, but the natural confidence of a man accustomed to respect. Kaya followed, and Mason brought up the rear, feeling oddly like a visitor in his own home. Inside, Hawkeye's stood in the center of the small room, taking in every detail. He spoke to his daughter. "He say you live simple," Kaya translated. "Like warrior. No extra things." "I don't need much," Mason replied. The chief took a seat at the table and gestured for Mason to join him. Kaya remained standing where she could see both men and the door. Through Kaya's translation, Hawkeye spoke at length. "You give water to my daughter when she fall. You not ask for payment. You not try to touch her or keep her. You give what needed and let go. This not normal for white men. They take, they demand, they hurt. But you just give." Mason met the chief's gaze. "She needed help. That's all." "My father say his test was hard test," Kaya continued. 6 days watching, 6 days waiting to see if you run to soldiers. If you tell them where we camp, if you sell information for gold or safety, you do none of these things." Her voice grew more formal, as if reciting something of great importance. "Men come with guns looking for us. You could tell them. Make them think you good white man who helps kill Apache." "I told you I don't want to kill anyone," Mason said. "But you also not want die," the chief said through Kaya. "Smart man who want die is useless. Man who want live, who choose how to live. This is valuable, man." Hawkeye's reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table and unwrapped it slowly, revealing a necklace of intricate beadwork on leather with bear claws and wolf teeth woven into the design. "This mark of protection," Kai explained. "You wear this. My people know you friend. They not harm you, not take from you. You under protection of our tribe." Mason stared at the necklace. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because you show honor when you not have to," Kaya answered. "Because you risk life to not betray us. Because my father see in you something rare. White man who understand that land belong to all. That water is for thirsty. That human being is human being." The chief spoke again, at length, his words carrying weight and wisdom. "My father say this land once all Apache land. Water flow free, game run free. Then white men come with paper that say they own what cannot be owned. They put up fence. They dig well. They say, this mine, that yours, you cannot pass here." Kaya paused. "But you different. You have fence, yes. You have well, yes. But when person need water, you give. You not ask if person Apache or white, if person Christian or not. You just give water to thirsty person? Anyone would do the same, Mason said quietly. No, the chief said in English, the single word carrying weight. Then he continued in Apache as Kaya translated. Most men would not. Most men see Apache girl and think danger, think problem, think opportunity. You see thirsty person. That is difference. The chief stood and pushed the necklace across the table toward Mason. You take, you wear. You protected. Mason picked up the necklace, feeling the weight of the decision. What does this mean for my ranch? For me? Kaya and her father exchanged a look. Then she spoke without translation. It mean you can live in peace. My people not trouble you. We watch over your land when you gone. If other Apache come through, we tell them you friend. She paused. But there is more. Those white men will come back. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will. They want fight Apache. They want revenge for things they think we do. If you wear this, if they see it, they think you traitor. They not understand. They want hurt you too. The chief spoke one final time, short and definitive. My father say choose carefully. Protection from us mean danger from them. You cannot have both. Mason held the necklace, feeling the weight of generations of conflict in his hands. It wasn't just beadwork and leather. It was a declaration, a line drawn in the desert sand that he'd have to stand on one side of. He thought about the militia that had just left. Carter's hard eyes, Wilson's burning hatred. If they returned and found him wearing Apache symbols, they'd shoot first and justify it later. He'd be labeled a turncoat, a traitor to his race. But what did that mean, really? His own people? White settlers who took land through force and called it legal? Men who hunted human beings like animals and called it justice? Were those his people just because they shared his skin color? Mason slipped the necklace over his head. It settled against his chest, heavy with meaning. I choose to live with honor, he said, same as I have been trying to do all along. The chief's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Respect, perhaps, or acknowledgement. He placed one hand briefly on Mason's shoulder, a gesture that needed no translation. 3 weeks passed in relative calm. Mason worked his land, tended his animals, and kept the necklace visible on his chest. He didn't hide it when traders passed through, didn't remove it when a cavalry patrol stopped to water their horses. If trouble was coming, he'd meet it on his own terms. The trouble arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Dust clouds rose from the southern trail, riders moving fast. Mason counted 8 men this time, better armed than before. Carter was back, and riding beside him was Wilson, his young face hardened with purpose, the scar on his cheek like a crack in marble. They formed a semicircle around Mason's yard, rifles ready. Carter's eyes locked onto the necklace. Heard rumors, he called out, about a rancher trading with the enemy. He nodded toward the beadwork. Guess the rumors were true. Mason stood his ground. I'm not trading with anyone. I'm living in peace. That's Apache craftwork, Wilson said, voice tight with anger. You're wearing their colors. That makes you one of them. It makes me someone they won't kill, Mason replied. Seems like a practical choice out here. It makes you a traitor, Carter said flatly. He dismounted, hand near his revolver. We came to give you a chance to explain yourself. Mason felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice steady. You want to know why I'm wearing this? Because I gave water to a dying girl who happened to be the daughter of a chief. They tested me for 6 days. I passed. They offered protection. I accepted. That's the whole story. You think that makes you special? Carter stepped closer. Think that makes you different from the rest of us trying to survive out here? No, Mason said. I think it makes me smart. You rode in hunting Apache. How many did you kill? The question hung in the air unanswered. That's what I thought, Mason continued. You found an army and turned back because you knew you'd lose. I made a different choice. I chose not to fight at all. Coward's choice, Wilson spat. Maybe, Mason acknowledged. But I'm alive. My ranch is standing, and I can sleep at night knowing I didn't start a war that would get good men killed on both sides. Carter studied him. You really think you can stay neutral in this? I don't think I can stay neutral, Mason said. I think I already picked a side. I picked the side that doesn't want bloodshed. If that makes me an enemy to you, then shoot me now and get it over with. He spread his arms, making himself an open target. The necklace gleamed in the morning light, its beadwork and claws catching the sun. No one moved. A hawk called overhead. Finally, Carter lowered his hand from his revolver. You're a damn fool, Reed, he said, but an honest one. He turned to his men. Mount up. We're just letting him go, Wilson protested, his knuckles white on his rifle. He ain't hurting anyone, Carter said. Then surprisingly, he added, You know, Reed reminds me of my brother. Stubborn as hell, but can't fault his reasons. Your brother wasn't a traitor, Wilson spat. My brother died at Shiloh, Carter said quietly, fighting for what he believed in. He looked at Mason with newfound respect. Same as this man's doing, just without the shooting. He swung back into his saddle. But don't expect us to come running if you need help. You made your choice. Live with it. I intend to, Mason replied. They rode out slower than they had arrived, less aggressive in their departure. Only Wilson looked back, his expression caught between anger and confusion before he too disappeared into the distance. Mason stood alone in his yard, acutely aware of how precarious his position was. He'd chosen to live between worlds, respected by the Apache but forever suspect to his own kind. There would be other Wilsons, other threats. The necklace that protected him from one danger exposed him to another. That evening, as the sun sank toward the western hills, Mason spotted movement on a distant ridge. A single rider watched from afar, Kaya, making sure he'd survived the confrontation. When she saw him looking, she raised one hand in acknowledgement. Then she turned her horse and vanished into the gathering shadows. Mason touched the necklace at his chest. Outside, the valley stretched silent under the first stars. No armies watching, no men hunting, just land and sky, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is choose not to fight. His ranch would stand, the water would flow, and when thirsty travelers passed through, Apache or white, friend or stranger, he'd offer them a drink and let them be on their way. Mason Reed had given water to a girl who needed it, and in return found something unexpected, a way to stand firm for what's right in a land where compromise seemed impossible. He might forever live on the edge of two worlds, but he would live with honor. And in the American West of 1876, that was as rare and precious as water in the desert.